Hello and welcome to the Think Liberty podcast. I am Marcy Darcy. This is episode 43. On this episode, we are talking about IP, intellectual property, some of the laws that are centered around it. I'm joined on this episode by Killian Hobbs. Killian, how you doing tonight?
Doing well. Finally got that new microphone all set up so I don't sound terrible anymore.
Yeah, man. Sounds real clean. I like it. I'm also joined by Lonie Dupree. Lonie, how you doing tonight, bud?
I'm doing okay, but I can't use my microphone setup because, well, it's complicated. So I'm on my phone, which, I don't know. It's all right. It'll work.
We're doing our best.
Yeah, we're going to sound half Think Liberty, half Tom Woods podcast. So pretend I'm a guest on the Tom Woods podcast, which I'd love to be one day.
He uses Skype, so there's this kind of like a certain quality that always comes across when one is using Skype. You sound a little like you're using Skype. I don't know if that's a knock on Skype or a testament to your phone microphone.
iPhones are good, I guess, for some things. It's whatever.
Yeah.
We dropped a lot of product names for an episode about IP.
Oh man, that's true. We really did, didn't we? Okay, so let's start it off by on our website this last not too long ago, a couple weeks ago here. Killian posted penned an article about a bill, and I was hoping you could, if anyone didn't read it, you could explain some of that here and tell us a little bit what that bill was about and what's some of the story behind it.
Yeah, I can do that. I want to preface it by saying, fuck Orrin Hatch. That needs to be said right off the bat.
Right.
So back on May 10th, he came up with Bill S2823. This was set basically to combine the Music Modernization Act with the Classics Act. So basically what this would have done is the Music Modernization Act has been pretty popular amongst people in the recording industry because of what it does as far as extending copyright to digital streaming services and ensuring that artists get paid for online services. That sounds great. Now, the Classics Act is absolutely atrocious. What it does is it takes music that was previously public domain, which was music prior to February 15th, 1972, and it immediately renews the copyright on all of it all the way until 2067. So what these two things together under Bill S2823 that Orrin suggested would mean that any and all online content that currently uses previously public domain music or any type of recording would immediately be in violation of national copyright law. That on its own is absolutely just atrocious.
Well, really
quick, it gets even better because there's other bills that were in play.
Hold on, before you go further, I do have to ask. The immediate first thing I thought of is this retroactive?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That means that's insane.
Yeah, you're not. Let's say 10 years ago when YouTube was just starting to be a thing. You put out a video and you used a song that was previously public domain. If their bots scrub through and find it, that very well could get pulled. Because especially with the social media platforms are going right now, they'll either just auto pull it, or if for some reason they don't, then that means that all of the record companies, because let's be honest, most of the time, about 98% of the royalties go to the companies, especially once it starts to get that old. They'll make all the money going after every individual that's used a public domain recording.
And that's a lot of people, right? Just so everybody listening, even the stuff on here, right? So I can tell you firsthand, right? When we go and Killian, for instance, just had his new podcast, Coffee Shop Philosophy, by the way, which you should be listening to.
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, absolutely. His first episode dropped, was it Thursdays? Right?
Yep, new episodes every Thursday.
Right. So he just had his episode drop on Thursday. And, we were looking for music for it the other day, and you have to go and you have to make sure that you're looking for copyright free music. So we go through and you find your copyright free music, but there's a lot of people that do this, and they rely on the fact that, past a certain year, this stuff is just kind of copyright free. And the fact that, and so tons of people, podcasters, people that, musicians that use this music and, samples and stuff like that all over the place are going to be affected by this then is the, essentially what's going on.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing people forget is there used to be like almost a myth of a rule where if the audio clip was 10 seconds or less, you could get away with it. And that's not the case. You use a recognizable clip of audio, and all of a sudden you're in violation.
The fact it's so insane to me at the fact that it's retroactive. I mean, think of all the people that have it in their songs and their music, maybe as clips in their podcasts, maybe their intro music or something like that. And what you're telling me is they will actively, these sites and these we're actively going to hunt this down and try to pull these down.
Well, they'd have to, because it would immediately fall under violation of copyright law. Now, here's the thing that gets me. Like, the retroactive is insane, but I also don't like the extension, because this applies to any recordings. There's just recordings. So this means stuff that's, going back to like the 1920s, let's say, and it applies until 2067. That's how many years they were setting the precedent for a copyright to last. Now, in the article I had there, it gets worse than just those two pieces of legislature coming together to create this unholy baby that Orrin Hatch thought is a brilliant idea. Two other bills that were proposed in 2017, still in the processing, looking for a bill like this to latch itself to, was the CASE Act, as well as the Register of Copyright Selection and Accountability Act. Now, the senators backing this one up, there's a whole list of people behind it, and they're the same ones supporting S2823 here. Let me explain these two. So the Cases Act would change it so that instead of you going to court for a copyright infringement, because that's usually the case, if there's a big copyright infringement, you get taken to court, you go through the whole process there. This would turn it basically into a private tribunal inside the government. The Register of Copyright would have to select people to be basically arbitrators as well as hire attorneys and everything else, and all claims would be settled inside of this office. Now, some people out there might say that that's a good idea because it means that the courts aren't going to be tied up with all this all this sort of stuff, and it might be more cost effective, et cetera, until you take a look at the Register of Copyright Selection and Accountability Act. This piece of work changes it so that the Librarian of Congress, who currently selects the register for copyright, no longer has that power. Instead, the register is selected by the President of the United States out of a pre-selected panel of people put together by Congress. So what this means, total package, is that everything that has ever been recorded is immediately subject to copyright unless the artist has explicitly stated that it's uncopyrighted work that they've put out there. And you're no longer going to court for it. You're going to a private tribunal run by people, appointed by the people in government who passed these same bills, who also receive campaign funds from the same companies that are going to be fighting you.
This is insane. So this, wow.
And I'm going to loop back and say, just now that people understand that, I'm going to say it one more time. Fuck Senator Orrin Hatch. I'm not even American, and I have to say, fuck this guy.
He's bad. He's a piece of work. So how familiar with copyright trolls are you, right? This, aside from all of this, it's this whole thing. Like, I don't know if you listen to the Adam Corolla podcast, but so a while ago, I want to say, I'm really aging myself here, but like maybe a handful of years ago, it was a while now, but he was attacked. So it was like Mark Maron and a bunch of these dudes, were attacked by, so like apparently this company back in like when tech was just really taking off, just getting started, they went and they had this like really like vaguely worded IP that apparently ended up encompassing podcasts. Right. And so there's this whole thing, and you know what? I'm gonna find the YouTube video for it of the Adam Corolla podcast. He has a lawyer actually come on and talk about this and how it's like this whole thing that's got like a deep history, and I'll link that in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can check that out. Just go to the show notes and you'll have that link there, so you can hear Adam Corolla's lawyer talk a little bit more about this and what went on, and I'll do my best to kind of get it out as best I can here. But basically they had this vague language here that covered podcasts essentially. And these guys went out and they hit like every major podcast. They hit Marin, they hit Corolla, they hit Joe Rogan, they hit all these guys, just tons and tons and tons of big podcasts. And what everyone ended up doing was just like settling, right? Like they're just like, here, we're just going to pay you to go away. And Corolla actually, this part was pretty cool. He drew a line in the sand. He's like, no, I'm not, I am going to court with you guys. But they dug into it. And that's like, apparently this was happening all over the place. These guys are doing this a lot. They're getting tons of money because no one wants to go through all the arbitration. They're just paying them off. And like, it's all handled by this one court in Texas that's got this judge that's just super favorable to the IP laws. And it sounds like what's going on now is just basically quote unquote legal, right? Version of that, in that, I guess that other version's legal too, but like the government's just constructing the system. They're like, they're watching these copyright trolls make all this money. And they're like, we're just going to build that in Congress. We're just going to do that now. Because it's essentially the same thing, right? Now all that money is just going to go to politicians and campaigns.
Pretty much, yeah. And when it comes to IP trolls, I mean, I think that's the perfect example of the ills of IP law. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I can understand some people's defense of it when it comes to things like making sure that funds for work get directly to artists, et cetera, except that's not how the record industry works. So that's a moot argument. That's a bad argument. Making a mental note of that for one of my new issues of that. Gonna probably cover that at some point.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the IP trolls, the thing that annoys me with it, and I say it annoys me with it, is that you'll have people who will copyright things, but the structure of what they need to produce to actually get a copyright is so flimsy. Like, they don't have to have any proof of concept. They don't have to have any actual like proper schematics for something or anything like that. They just need to put a loose idea down, copyright the idea, and then just because they said, hey, this is a thing that could be, they immediately own it.
And that's exactly what happened with this, the story I was telling you with the podcast stuff. When that law was granted, or whatever, however you want to say it, right? When they were given that privilege, to have that protection, podcasts didn't even exist. It wasn't even a thing then, but just, podcasts came out, and then someone went and got their paperwork and said, hey, wait, look, this is applicable to what's going on here. And all these people are making money. So we're going to go shake them down. And they just went one by one,
Yeah. I mean, in the same sense, like, if that's the precedent we're setting, then I guess the entire cell phone industry owes a lot of money to Gene Roddenberry.
I don't understand that. What do you?
Gene Roddenberry came up with. He was the founder for Star Trek and the tricorders and everything else like that.
Oh shit! Okay.
So that's like the first example of seeing like a portable communication device, all that sort of stuff.
It's a deep pull.
Literally, he had that in his show back in the 60s. So I guess the entire industry owes him money. Oh wait, he wasn't a dick about it.
Right, but that's relevant, It's essentially the same thing, right? Like he had this idea. Clearly, you can go on TV and watch it. So let's let him go after it. Like that it is a dangerous precedent. It's terrible, and you see it in all kinds of other places too. Like this, it's going to be gnarly because what Orrin Hatch is trying to do, like what this sounds like from what you're describing, is it's just like the floodgates of music and IP. And I could just see tons and tons of like the situations that we talked about when it happened with the podcasting, except now you've got the government going after people, right? That would essentially be what this is. Basically. And the worst part too is that another article I had, I guess at this point it would have been maybe about a month ago or so, when the big controversy with Alex Jones getting removed from all the platforms took place.
there was another bill that was being put forward that would basically, well, it wasn't a bill, it was a memo that got leaked from a senator that was talking about putting a whole bunch of restrictions on the internet and all of the social media platforms, things like that, where they would have to immediately conform to whichever laws kind of came out from the government, and it would have to be an immediate thing or massive fines would be in place, et cetera, basically giving the government control of speech on the internet. Now, in relation to that one, let's tie it into this whole thing. So all of a sudden, there's copyright that's immediately applicable to all of these things. So if this other thing went through, the one part where they were this little memo that leaked, it's not an official bill yet. It was just a memo of suggestions that he's probably going to try to put together as a bill somewhere. If all of those go through, then that means that we might not even see the court side get implemented on this, because all of the media platforms will basically be forced to do a full scrub of their servers of anything that's related, and it'll just be gone in an instant. It just Thanos snapped his fingers and the government said, "Let there be no content."
Ugh. Boy, doesn't that sound like a good time? And that's too much. I mean, this is insane. It's not only is it setting up this ability to control, but it's just like it turns these industries just into cash registers for the state. To go after, I mean,
they aren't already.
They are, but even more so now. You know, you can just push up against it with litigation, and it's just, it's insane. I mean, really, ask everyone to listen to that episode that I'm going to link in the show notes. And they talk about just how much money these are law firms are making by going after stuff, well, for that podcast IP. And this is so it opens it up to so much more than that was.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the scariest part about this whole thing is that this sets the precedent just for audio recordings. And that's only one of, 1,000 different industries that IP law applies to. So, I mean, this is a case where, okay, let's say this all goes, worst case scenario, all of this goes through, it becomes applied, this utter bullshit takes place. That sets the precedent for things outside of this industry. That sets the precedent for, so let's say Coca-Cola demanding that, hey, this episode of this show used, had our product in the background and mentioned it. We want our cut. Hey, this web series made a reference to The Simpsons. I don't care how old it is. We want our cut. Even like if you take a look at other things that have become public domain, like depictions of, like, let's say video game characters like Sonic or Mario, or just anything in that kind of vein, I'm pretty sure you can already come up with some ideas in your mind of things that fall under that. If this precedent is set for the recording industry, which has always been the forefront of IP law as far as changes, adaptations, evolution of the law, etc., if this goes through, it sets the precedent that all of these other companies can ask for backdated funds. It sets the precedent of grandfathering IP and eliminating the concept of public domain, which once you get into things like how that's going to affect, the rights for parody and stuff like that are under subsections of, freedom of speech concepts and things like that, it's just a nightmare where a ton of people are either going to have to get rid of their content or they're going to have to pay.
Right. And they're going to have to pay a lot. And that's the whole deal. And it's like you said, but like this, IP is already wreaking havoc in the medical industry. Big time. It's, I would argue it's one of the biggest issues in the American medical industry. Okay. So look at the Martin Shkreli situation. This guy goes and he takes this medication, and say what you will, a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about Shkreli and what he did and all that stuff. But, you essentially have the guy, and he went and he bought this medication. He had the rights to it, right? He bought the copyright to it, IP, whatever you want to call it. And what did he do? He just jacked the price up on it. It was something like $13 a pill, and he jacked it up to $750 a pill. Right now, everyone called him a monster. and he turned around and said, look, your insurance is going to cover it. And while that may be true, like, why do you think insurance premiums are so high? Or do you think he's the only guy that jacked up the price to increase his profit margins on a medication because he had the state privilege to do so, just like Shkreli did? Now, granted, Shkreli, I don't know how much that was, like a 13, or some insane percentage, like 750% or something like that. That he jacked that price up. Maybe it was like 1,300. I don't know. Can't remember. But that's an insane amount, and he got the headlines because he jacked it up that crazy amount. But like, do you think that people aren't just like, well, let's pump it like 60%? Let's shoot it up like 30%. Right? That's the exact opposite of what competition does to prices.
You see that, like, a good example for the prices jumping up because of controlled domain over information. Look at education. I mean, you take a look at that, and the concept is, government loans pay for it. People pay it off over time. It's not something they're going to really notice. So obviously people get burdened with student loans that last forever. And the whole reason is because we have institutes that have basically a control on the information that they have. It's not just that you went out and you got information and stuff and you can prove it and you go get a job and do whatever you want. It's almost as if the knowledge itself is trademarked by the degree that you get with it and which institute it came from. So they jack the price up. Like, going to the medical side, one of the worst ones with that is the way that they renew their IPs. Because I forget the exact amount of years, but if a certain product remains in just in the general public, after a certain amount of years, generic versions of it can start being manufactured. That's why, like, Tylenol and just generic ibuprofen aspirin is as cheap as it is. Right. It's that cheap because the basic formula is public domain because of the restrictions on that type of medicine. Right. The problem is that only works if the same thing stays the whole time. What the companies will do is they'll take the same pill and they'll change one ingredient. They'll, up it a milligram, drop it a milligram, change it, just a little bit. And by doing that, they've immediately renewed their IP on the product because they've updated the product. They've changed it.
And this is really frustrating to me because people all the time, in defense of IP, will talk about how, maybe not even in defense of IP, just people just in the defense of the state will talk about how the state is necessary. We went into this on an episode 40. And we talked about how the state with monopolies, right? And everyone's heard this. People go, what are you going to do with monopolies? How about this behavior here, right? Isn't that what they're scared of with monopolies? Am I wrong here? Is they're scared of someone having the monopoly on a resource and then jacking up the price? Isn't that what's going on here? I mean, they're granted a monopoly by law and they're jacking up the price, right?
Well, that's exactly what IP law is when you break it down. It's the monopoly of an idea.
Right. So here you have people that are sitting there saying that the state is necessary to protect us from monopolies and the behavior that comes with a monopoly, like having absolute control of something and then jacking the price up. And those are often the kind of same people that are advocating for socialized medicine, right? And you're not paying any attention to the fact that you are completely sitting there saying that you oppose something, while also out of the other side of your neck talking about the fact that you are really ready and willing to give all the power in the world to that thing that is doing exactly what it is that you're complaining about.
Well, I mean, let's be fair. It's the same group of people that say, the average citizen doesn't need a gun. Only the police need guns. And also the police are all a bunch of violent bastards and they just keep killing people. It's the same doublethink.
It's just, it blows my mind. It's crazy. I know Lonnie, he's gonna be a little bit of a break in the waves here because I know has something to say that may not just be a bunch of hate on IP. Let's see, I muted him here earlier. Let me see if I can unmute him. Sorry, this is real classy. Lonnie, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you?
All right, there he is.
Well, the thing is, I have been working on, I guess, a devil's advocate kind of argument against all this. But hearing y'all go back and forth, I'm like, I got nothing.
It's rough, man. This is one of those tough ones.
On this, because I got nothing, because the thing is, I have some sympathies to the idea of intellectual property, because I can understand like this idea of, say, someone working on a new invention of some sort that's going to benefit things greatly, and they had they were going to just release it open source or whatever the case may be, and then someone got wind of it, released their own version, and then now they're charging for it, and it just kind of ruins the initial idea. Or perhaps, say, someone releases a product, they're a small business, and they're trying to get it out there to where they can make it big and all this kind of stuff. And then this larger company comes, makes the same product, calls it something else, but it's the exact same product, functions the same and everything, but they can release it on a wider scale, and that takes from the original inventor of this product. So I can understand frustrations with that and see that I can have some sympathies to it. But at the same time, I mean, like I said, hearing y'all go back and forth about this, I'm just like, I can't, this is undefendable. What you're talking about now, this new bill or this new whatever, this, you can't with a clear conscience defend it. I know Lars Ulrich, he probably has a boner right now over this, but if any of you are old enough to remember the whole Napster thing, that's how old I am, that I use Napster.
Oh God, do you remember when that first? Now I was lucky. So my buddy, one of my best friends, his dad had like a computer repair shop. So not only did they have like, this was the best place, because they had like 3 computers in the attic, and like they had 2 computers in the house. And he was like the first dude I knew that had high speed cable internet. And that was like right when Napster came out. Oh my God, I was like a kid in a candy store. It was insane.
Yeah, like I remember like seeing like those files, and you're like, oh, that's a good one. And it's like requires T1 internet connection. When's the last time you heard of a T1 internet connection? But like that was like the connection to have, like if you wanted to do all this cool stuff. Oh,
it was bad, dude. I was downloading songs in like a half a second, 2 seconds. It was terrible. I destroyed that poor man who let us hang out. So many hard drives.
Yeah, and then after that's what I was about to say. That's what I was just about to say. Like after you got rid of Napster, or Napster changed, which was a good working product, a good working program, then you had like these LimeWire, Kazaa. There was a couple others. Oh, okay.
It was like the black market and peer to peer.
Right.
Downloading platform. They were just terrible. They're terrible.
Yeah, you had to really watch what you downloaded, because I'm sitting here trying to download Dragon Ball Z episodes, taking like, hours to do so. And turns out, it's some weird homemade porn, and it's like, oh my God, I just spent 6 hours downloading some fat person's sex tape. Like, this is great.
Instead of Dragon Ball Z, it was just Dragon Balls.
Right. Yeah. Somebody was just dragging their balls across somebody instead of, what I actually wanted to see.
No, it was pretty insane. It was like the wild, wild west for digital files.
Yeah. And a lot of people just, but I mean, at the same time, that's what you get whenever.
Do you remember that one with like Bill Clinton?
Oh God, yes.
You know what I'm saying? It had like the Star Spangled Banner or something. He's like, "Hey,
I did not have sexual relations with that woman."
High quality MP3s. Hey.
Yeah. So, So, anyways, back to you got kind of a little off on a little thing there, but yeah. Like I could understand, like I guess this idea of, like I guess maybe what is it? I know me and Vinny had discussed it before, but you were talking about trademarking and blockchain encryption and just things like that, and that's how a person would be able to protect their intellectual property, air quotes there, without the government, to where, you know, somebody just down your street couldn't be like, start putting up like, oh, I'm making Coca-Cola now, you know, like they wouldn't be able to do that because Coca-Cola would be a sort of trademark or encrypted name of some sort. I don't remember exactly how we discussed it. It was just such a long thing, and it was a while back. But yeah, I'm open to things like that, to where, you know, people can't just have their, you know, their big break, you know, taken out from under them. You know, someone, you know, Kanye West can't just come and steal your song anymore. I love Kanye, but he has stolen some stuff. but yeah, I do want to see. I would like to see artists, you know, and inventors and stuff like that, in a sense, protected, but not through government. I would just like some kind of way that can happen. But whenever you start having it through government, then it's that slippery slope that leads to what y'all have been talking about for the past half an hour or so. And that's why there needs to be new ideas on how to protect these kind of things without the use of government, obviously, because otherwise now any YouTube video from like 8 years ago that's been lingering around, that, you know, somebody would just put up a video of their party and some song playing in the background by the DJ or whatever. Now it's going to get a fine. They're going to get a fine for it, you know, and it has like 200 views, 50 views, you know, something like that. And they forgot about it. Now they're getting a letter in the mail. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it gets pretty deep. And for the record, I just, man, not to derail the conversation, for anyone listening, I just realized this new recording platform we're using, I was muting my mic, so if anyone heard random beeps within the last half hour, I apologize. We're working out some kinks. I just now realized the way I'm recording it might have picked those up. I'll listen to it in post, but if in fact those did come through, listeners, I am sorry. We're not starting over.
I know I was messing with a box, and I didn't have myself muted. I was messing with a box or something, and that's how I ended up muted for the first 20-30 minutes of this. Yeah,
we came in hot. It was like super peaky, and the volume was loud. So thank you very much, listeners, for sitting with us through this. But yeah, so getting back to it.
Well, it's almost like as if it's back to our first episode or something, where we're still trying to figure things out. You know, it's like a little throwback. So, you know, it's not so bad.
No, it's not too bad. You guys get in there and work it out, you know, see what you can do. But so one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and as far as like IP goes, so the stuff that you mentioned, Lonnie, I do think, like, you know, that stuff isn't rad. You know, like I don't think anyone likes the idea of like a little mom and pop store coming out with a product and then, you know, having a larger corporate entity just basically say, hey, I really like that. Now I'm going to make it, you know, make my version of it. And I'm just going to totally wreck you, you know? So let's peel this one back though. All right. So on the first point that you made, if you're making something and someone just basically says like, hey, I'm going to make that, and they make it faster. So let's examine the chances of something like that would really happen. Now we're talking about something clearly that is some sort of a challenge at least to come up with, right? Because a lot of this stuff has to be like manufactured or made or machined or something somehow, right? Like if it's some kind of an attachment on something, or you know what I mean, like some physical thing, or like we were talking about a drug or something like that, right? Like a lot of times if you're the person that's discovering it and you're the person that's going to try and take it, you are at a disadvantage because you haven't done as much work for this thing as the person who created it did. So the realistic chances of you being able to like jump in and decide, hey, I'm going to make that, like you're behind. Is this making sense?
Yeah, but China already does that.
Well, right. I'm just saying
China just gets products, they reverse engineer them, and they release basically clones of them. It happened in the vaping industry a lot.
Well, that's a separate thing, right? You
mentioned
American
company would release something, and
because
the Chinese company would buy it,
right,
to take their measurements, and they create it.
Right, because you mentioned two different situations, though, right? You mentioned the situation where it's like someone could see, what you're doing and come out with it before you. Right, and do it first. And my point there was that that would probably be hard to do because you're ahead of the game on them on that one.
Oh yeah, something like that, where maybe there was more, like if there was like a program or something with a lot of internals that couldn't be seen. I definitely understand that, but. Thinking of more simple kind of things where, you kind of look at it and, hey, there it is. I mean, that's kind of some of the thought there. Although, I mean, with the way
to that point, like if it's that easy to make, you know what I mean?
Yeah, why hasn't everybody been making it?
Sure, right. And so, and then when you're talking about the other thing, like with the inventor, like one of the other points that I did want to make, I didn't mean to kind of step on you there. I just wanted to get all this out here while I could. But
no, you could.
At a certain point, because I think we get stuck in these situations, and it's like people want to hear the perfect answer. Right? Like people want to hear the answer to where it's like, okay, well, I want people to be able to invest in something and get paid for their investment. I want people to get paid for R&D, or I want a local business to be able to create something and be able to protect its invention. And I also don't want companies to have a monopoly on something and jack the price up. Right. And I don't think that exists.
I don't think it does either. This is why I'm leaning more to whenever, what was it? The blockchain kind of encryption that I believe you had talked about before. I don't think either of us truly understood exactly how it works. I know I don't, but I know you had a better idea of it than I did. No offense, I just don't know your full knowledge on it.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, it because that stuff's pretty complicated.
Well, you got to look at it like this: like a blockchain is just it's an open ledger,
right?
Yeah, that's it, right? You don't really need to bother yourself with wondering how things get there. It's just an open ledger.
Yeah. So whenever we come to say like apps, programs, things like that, more, I suppose, digital kind of products or inventions, things like that. I think that's where you may have a bit more protection, artistic stuff, music, things like that. You still have a way there to protect your property, I suppose. But with physical things, unless you create it in hiding and then you release it upon the world,
well, let's be clear.
Everyone can see it and everyone knows to get it from you.
No, so and to be clear, so when I talk about that happening there, that's more of an argument of cutting bureaucracy and red tape than it is for anything. Because if you observe it like what it is, it's just a ledger. So all it does is it just tells you, hey, so let's say Lonnie created Pogs. Remember Pogs? Those were fun, right?
I don't think I'm that old.
No, you didn't have that? I was pretty old. Yeah, Pogs with the
Or
slammer.
I might have just been poor and my parents didn't buy them for me.
Okay, let's try something else. Let's say Lonnie invented Nintendo, right? And you're like, okay, I invented Nintendo, and I got this guy Mario, and it's pretty cool. So I'm going to go to the blockchain, and I'm just going to submit this thing, and it's going to say on this date, Lonnie created Nintendo with Mario, and I'm going to send it to the block. So all you've done is sent information to the blockchain. Right. There's no enforcement mechanism. There's no nothing like that. Right. And so when I talk about this being a way to replace some of the stuff, and it's mostly trademark, not so much IP.
Right.
It's a way to cut bureaucracy and red tape. You have these departments and people that are in charge of doing this stuff. With blockchain, it gives us the opportunity to have a decentralized blockchain with that information's just there. You're able to say, you can just take someone to court and say, okay, I'm going to sue you for using my, saying you're Nintendo. And they're like, prove it. And you're like, it's here on the block. It's immutable. No one can change it. It's decentralized, but you still need an enforcement mechanism.
So now what I'm wondering, now that you said that, I'm going to have to ask Killian this question. If this new bill were to be passed, could this episode be taken down because we mentioned Nintendo and Mario and Coca-Cola and Metallica and all these other things throughout the episode?
Well, you can talk about it. You just can't.
Yeah, we're not including like a bunch of clips of it or anything like that.
He claimed to invent Nintendo.
But I got one side question with this, right? I mean, I like the blockchain idea. It sounds like a great way. It's a public forum way of putting a stamp out to say I'm the founder of this product. This is my product, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then I look at it from a market perspective, right? And I mean, so let's say you come up with an idea. You create use an old business term, you create the widget, right? And another company comes across it, sees the same thing. Now, they could try manufacturing the exact same product. They could take it that route. And like Vinny said earlier, they're going to start off behind the eight ball. Even if it's a bigger company, they're going to start off behind. You're going to have a name built up a little bit, not just for the product, but for the company that manufactured the product. There's going to be, in a more less regulated society, a lot of things is going to have to come down to, almost guild work or just regular consumer reports, things like that are highlighting this information. Or even the blockchain idea where you're backing it up with an actual marker on a public forum blockchain where people can see that you made it. But even then, it's beneficial to the market in general if other people can see your idea, take it in their direction.
Yes, but then you have kind of like that. It's for the greater good.
I'll explain what I mean, right?
Yeah, I don't think you're really going like that way, but I'm thinking on like the individual person. Like, we can look at the whole world, the whole market, but whenever it comes down to the individual, like that's kind of what I think about. Because of course, this benefits everyone if the big company steals the idea, quote, steals the idea. This benefits everyone, but what about the little guy that made it first? That's the kind of thing that I'm kind of thinking about.
Oh no, and again, I agree with that entirely. That's why I support the idea of this blockchain methodology that you guys are discussing. But I'm saying, like, from a market perspective, the very way that the market improves, almost every idea that there's been in the last 150 years has been some sort of mashup of previously existing ideas. I mean, even take cellular technology is a great example. It started off with basic comm wave radio that then turned into the cellular devices we have. And then, Palm Pilots came out, and then BlackBerry decided to fuse a Palm Pilot with a cellular device so they could all do the same thing. And then Apple finally came along and they were able to update things and make things work better with their original iPhone system. And that kind of kicked off the whole smartphone system that has become a staple of everyone's lives nowadays. And all of that took place because other people took a look at someone else's product and said, I like it. I want to make one. However, I want to do it my way. Right.
And the thing is, in my idea, I am still perfectly fine with that. Because I want to say,
like, if they carbon copy it and do the exact same product, right? Okay,
right,
yeah. Like I was wondering, like, going into like slight variations or something like that, because
right, yeah.
If it's just like,
if someone were to make a different, like the same sort of idea, but say if it was an improvement, let's say it was inferior, but it performed almost the same function, but it was clearly a different product. That, to me, that's not, that's like saying, looking at music and, if you're a musician and you can hear chord progressions and things like that, and the fact that there's only 8 notes, I mean, there's going to be things that sound similar.
That's like what I was talking about before, though, right? Like, some stuff's just going to happen.
Yeah. So, there's... I kind of view that a little bit differently. Like, whenever I think about it, I think of, let's say someone creates a song and then someone comes and steals it word for word, note for note, and then releases it as their own song. I believe Drake has done this. Kanye West has done this. Tons of other bigger artists have done this. And
can you call it the same song if it's different vocals, though? How much of a variation does it need to be a different product at that point? Like, for example, my voice singing something, as horrendous as that would be, my voice singing something is going to sound differently. It might even carry a different feeling than if you're doing the falsetto singing that you were doing earlier.
I love doing that.
We could be singing the exact same song, same lyrics. The background music could be the same notes on the same instruments, etc., etc. What if it's what if it's a copy of the same vocals, except we redid the music, so instead of a guitar, it's an alto sax in the background? At what point of dissimilarity can we call it something different if we're still going to have an enforcement mechanism on the original?
Yeah, that's a good point, because you got to think about it too, though. Like, think about it too. Like, what do you like? I mean, it's a great point, right? Because Chad Kroeger from Nickelback can sing Bobby McGee all he wants, right? But it's not Janis Joplin. It's never going to be Janis Joplin unless Janis Joplin sings that song. Now, granted, not everyone has a unique talent like that, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's an issue that there is no unique talent there these days. And maybe if you're not unique talent, then you got to figure out a way to be that, right? Maybe the industry's gotten soft because this kind of stuff is allowed to exist the way it is. I mean, okay, so look at one of the things that I like to talk about when I talk about IP, and because people often get real freaked out, because I think naturally, and probably anyone listening, okay, so if that's going to happen, then what's the incentive for me to make something? Right? What's the incentive for me to make a product? So I tell people all the time, look at the technology industry. Look over to Dropbox is a great example of this. Cloud storage. Tons of people do cloud storage. No one has IP on cloud storage. No one needed a copyright law on the concept of cloud storage. Dropbox is doing fine. Okay. Microsoft, obviously they're doing fine. They have their whole OneDrive thing too, but
yeah, I mean, you got OneDrive, you got Google Drive, you got Dropbox, you got
all these places, and they're doing, I'm sure the products are doing fine.
Yeah. I think certain ISPs, they can have their own cloud storage in a sense, like, Comcast,
they all do. Yeah. Apple's got its everyone has it, and they charge for it, and I'm sure they make money for it. So where's the IP needed for cloud storage? It wasn't. But the thing is there's not giant margins.
Too, ISPs are probably the best example of how terrible IP law is. They're probably the best example because they create their service, right? They set their, they create the service, they set everything up. And because they own the lines that are being used for it and they own the information crossing the lines, everything else, it makes cross use of their networks basically impossible. And then the government puts up roadblocks to allow other companies to set up the infrastructure that they need in order to have different areas. That's how a company like Comcast has the worst customer service in like the United States, period.
Yeah, because they don't have any competition. We went over this in the net neutrality episodes. You can't lay lines.
I think a lot of times what they do is say, like, the company will come in and they'll be like, I see you have all these new neighborhoods. Well, we'll pay for the poles. We'll pay for all of this, putting all of this up, and you can run your electricity and all this kind of stuff. But we have to have exclusive access for internet and, and their services. But, you can put your own electricity and, different kind of things there, and I think that's kind of how they gained that. It wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. It's all just a bunch of BS,
It's right. It's the net neutrality one really pisses me off because it's like
I'm sorry. I just imagined a free market and there'd just be like 7 poles next to each other, like in a pile,
like idiocracy. But okay. So here's just to go into this real quick. All these conversations, it's so funny. They start as one thing and then they turn to something else. But this totally has to do with IP. So you take something like Comcast, right? What Killian's talking about, the reason that ISPs aren't able to compete with companies like Comcast is because, and if you haven't listened to the episode we did on net neutrality, it's so simple and fundamental at a really basic level is that you need to run wire to your house. That's it. In order to run wire to your house, someone's got to put that wire on a pole. And right now, companies like Comcast and companies like AT&T have the rights to be on those poles. And if someone like Google Fiber is going to come and they're going to try and get up on that pole, Comcast and AT&T with lobbyists and money to the lobbyists, of course, to, grease palms to create laws to make it easier for them to turn around and litigate to get people off of those poles. Right? This is exactly the problem. This is why those companies are able to stay where they are. Right? So the government grants privilege to these companies to be able to have that monopoly, to be able to be the only companies that can run wire to people's houses. And as a result, they have to go and do net neutrality because they've allowed, this monster to have too much control. And it's go ahead.
Wait, let me get this straight. So because of the very existence of IP, we have government enforced monopolies that now beg for more state power to control? No, that wouldn't happen. The government wouldn't do that.
Right. I thought the government was there the government's there to control monopolies after they create them. Right.
I thought they were there to just like hand out like puppy bouquets to people. Oh, okay. It's frustrating. Just think. The worst part with IP is that the longer you look at it, the more it just hurts your brain. The more you look at how many things get stopped, how many ideas get trounced, how many extra laws, extra money gets spent, wasted taxpayer money, all of which, like, you would think that people on the left would be angrier about the type of corporate welfare that this creates. And IP law is the epitome of corporate welfare. Oh, yeah. IP law, the government saying, we're going to give you complete dominion on this idea. And because we're going to do that, you're going to make a shit ton of money, and we're going to spend all the money to make sure that that's enforced. The government takes on all of the cost. The companies take on all of the profit, and everyone says, "Oh, well, it's capitalism's the devil." Well,
the government really, gets paid
just the
too.
State.
Well, the government gets paid too. Like in the situation with Comcast, to get the lobbyists. Comcast. Well, I don't like these people up on these poles, so they're going to go and they're going to send lobbyists, to Washington with suitcases full of money. And they're going to go and grease some skids so they can get some laws in their favor that say that they can just fucking have an easier time with dragging people through the mud trying to get on the poles. That's the whole thing. The whole reason Google Fiber didn't catch on is because they didn't have enough money to keep up with these ISPs who were just constantly just litigating them off the poles.
Yeah, and that's kind of the danger of like the stuff that I was talking about, in my mind, I'm thinking about protecting, the little guy, the small mom and pop stuff. But the problem is that's how. Now, this is also just kind of more like an exercise that I do in my mind. I don't really agree with IP laws, but I try to see if I can come up with some sort of way that's kind of like a happy medium. But anyways, the problem is they're always promoted as this protection of the little guy. The problem that comes into place is they're always used by the big guy. And the big guy has tons of money. Right.
And what happens more?
The big guy. The big guy blocks everybody.
Exactly right.
That's what happens.
That's what happens more. It's one of those things to where people are so like they romanticize this idea of the protection of the underdog. But if you look at it from an objective view and you actually kind of focus on what's really going on, the little guy, instances of the quote unquote little guy getting kind of raked over the coals are probably, a pretty small percentage, and instances where big companies are using it to get state privilege to increase margins are far more common. So it's
absolutely. That's why like that position isn't really a true one. It's just one that I try to use to kind of almost play like, not really like a devil's advocate, but I try to think like maybe there's some sort of way, without, miles and miles of paperwork, red tape that we have now. But it's just
it doesn't pass
I don't think it's
it doesn't pass the smell test.
Oh, absolutely not. Back to medical. A lot of times when you have, say, like a new idea, almost like a new cure or a new treatment, that's the only one. And that's the only one that can be there. And no one else can go, well, hey, we can make it and release it for like $1 a pill. But we can't because we're not allowed to, because they have the monopoly on the cure for X. And that's wrong. That's sick. Pardon the pun. But I'm sure Killian likes the pun, but whatever.
I love it.
But yeah.
Let's not open that can of worms here.
What were you saying there, Killian?
Sorry.
He touched on 2 points here that I wanted to ask, just kind of challenge the counterpoint that he had here. Looking at how the government has done everything so far, and the fact that greed is a thing and you can, grease palms and do all that sort of stuff. A, doesn't that speak against the very idea of an enforcement mechanism that you were mentioning earlier? And then B, I would say, if we're talking about best defenses for, your intellectual property, the best defense is to be the best at it. Which if you're the originator of a concept, you should be able to execute it the best out of anybody else. If someone else can come along and execute your product better than you should have spent a little bit more time at the drawing board. I know that sounds a little callous, but if we're talking about the best ways to ensure that, the person who comes up with something gets the most out of the product before the market cannibalizes it and turns it into 1,000 other things if it really catches on, the best way to do that is to have a better product.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree. I agree with you 100%.
What I was saying on the topic of the enforcement bit, so much that it was just an observance. Putting information on the blockchain doesn't do shit, right? Like you can put whatever you want up there. It doesn't mean anything unless you can enforce it in that sense, in the sense of it being used for a trademark.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like you're absolutely right. Like you just have to, it's dog eat dog, basically. That's how the free market is, and
that's competition though that brings consumers the best products.
You have to compete, and that's just all there is to it. If you can't, then oh well.
I do have one more question.
That
actually,
sucks,
this blockchain idea actually is pretty intriguing for me here. So when it comes to this concept of IP enforcement, where it's it's not government, it's just making a note of who is the originator of idea, so that more conscious customers, which if you had a freer market, customers would have to be more conscious by default, just for the sake of self-preservation, if nothing else.
Right.
In a system like that, how does that counter troll IP? Or does it at all? Because I'm thinking, like, if this is a system that works, I could make a lot of money by copywriting the zero. I'd own half of all information at that point. It'd be great.
Well, it's just like anything else, right?
Can we go do that right now?
No.
Can we go copy the zero?
No, I mean I think
India already owns it.
Well, that's the thing, though, right? Is it's just like right now. It doesn't change anything, right? This isn't like the anarchist solution or anything like that. It just removes a lot of dead weight loss, kind of, that you see in government, right? Like this, the fact that people say you throw money at government and 60% of it's getting burned away before it even gets to the other side because of all the red tape and bureaucracy. So that's all that really is, right? It doesn't make the laws any more just. And it doesn't do a bunch in that aspect, right? That there would still have to be a precedent set that said, you can't claim zero. But one of the things it would have done is like this, just the vagueness, right? Because that's where what's dangerous about it right now is it's a ruling on language, essentially. Right. And like, so these days, you're not going to be able to just like put a paragraph in a blockchain and then come back and say like, oh, see, that paragraph closely relates to what they're doing here years later, so that's clear. If there's laws,
right.
If there's laws that exist that say you could do that, I guess there is, but
I think it's
just a ledger.
Yeah. I think it's more the idea of, say someone wrote a novel. Okay. Since we're talking about, like Killian talked about, like the quality of the voice or like the different instruments. Say if someone wrote a novel where it's just letters, contrasting black and white, that someone could put that novel, I guess, on the blockchain to where it all traces back to them, to where, that way no one can, I guess, literally take it word for word and release it.
Well, and to be clear, so let me clear this up a little bit too. When I talk about enforcement, it's not so much enforcement. I mean, I guess it can be enforced, but like what I would assume, because where do all of these things take place anyway? In a courtroom, right? With lawyers. And so basically, right, yeah. At that point, it's just your word against theirs. And if you have an immutable, decentralized ledger of information, and you can just clearly show that, like, look, I was there first.
Right,
like,
yeah. So you can prove.
So you win the case.
I wrote this book, and here it is. Right. And here's the date. And they literally took the book and then put it out on their own. Yeah. And in essence, stole this potential money from me. So now I want all of that money that they took from me because I'm the one that wrote this book.
I mean, theoretically, that's when it goes back to what Killian...
theoretically.
That's when it goes back to what Killian was saying, though, about, like, it just depends on the laws. What laws. But if it were just like a matter of litigation, it just makes file processing
clearly someone could look at that and be, okay, all right, clearly they did this first. You owe them all of that money from the sales.
Maybe not even that from like money from the sales. See, the things that like, the thing that when it comes to trademark, the thing that always gets me kind of tangled up is, let's say McDonald's or any other food company, right? They go out there like Jack in the Box or something, and they've got their product, and then someone goes and they say, okay, well, I'm going to open a Jack in the Box too. So they open a Jack in the Box, and the second Jack in the Box, a rip-off Jack in the Box, everyone's getting sick from it. People are dying. And then people come and they sue them. Second Jack in the Box. And there's so many people that they come and they start suing you now. Because you are also Jack in the Box. And there is no difference because someone made a fake Jack in the Box. So now you're having all of these, like, not only is it drenching your brand in negativity and all of this bad press, but you could potentially be hit with lawsuits because people think that you're the same as the other thing, right? So there's a lot of ethical arguments to be made for why that trademark could be important as far as like protecting people. But it's tricky, man. It's another one of those things when you talk about the cost benefit analysis. Maybe that also would end up to be something to where it's like we feel like we need to be protected with that, but what we would see is more instances of people just using the legal system to you know.
You gave me an interesting idea with that. Me and you, we both can go on for hours and hours and hours about effective messaging and effective communication and discussion when we're discussing, libertarian ideas and things like that.
Right.
Wouldn't that be a great case, though, for the breaking up of corporations for people that swing towards the left but still support IP law? Being able to say that because of the types of liabilities there in a completely decentralized market, it's more likely that those businesses are either going to be completely separate, even though they steal the brand name and they do everything the same, all that sort of stuff. At that point, it wouldn't be that you market yourself as, Jack in the Box in general. You market yourself as Jack in the Box at this location in this place in order to differentiate yourself. And if you have companies that grow like McDonald's does, or they become the big chains, then at that point you need to have some form of proof that each individual location is connected in some way. In that sense, it would almost decentralize the concept of a corporation entirely, just out of nothing else than to protect itself from liability. And that's something that, those on the left clamor for all the time is, saying that, corporations are too big, they have too much power, et cetera, et cetera. Well, getting rid of that IP component literally takes the fangs off the wolf. It makes it so that not just is it unlikely that these businesses will be able to stay as big as they are, it makes it almost a risk to stay as big as they are without either turning into some form of, I almost feel dirty saying this, but turn into some kind of like quasi-mutualist co-op of owners at different locations that market their locations separate in order to identify themselves as part of the same brand that actually holds themselves together as a brand.
Well, look at it,
or they have to just be completely separate at that point.
Well, look at it like, so let's go back to cloud storage, right? They don't even need to be the same brand. Everyone's kind of doing the same thing, right? Now, granted, it's different in that we're not talking about one entity, but what I wanted to point to was because you were talking about like this insane amount of money, and I think that's exactly it. Like if you look at what gives these people, these places, these corporations and companies that's too big to fail money is the state privilege. If not, you end up like this. Look at the cloud storage. Like they're doing fine, right? They don't have like lobbyist money. They don't have top political contributor to Orrin Hatch money because they don't have the state privilege for that, which is exactly what Orrin Hatch is trying to get them more of.
Going back to him for one sec, his top contributors were pharmaceutical because of his hard-on for IP. Lawyers because of like the Federalist Society that he co-founded, that are the other people that'll benefit from these laws going through because they get all the money from fighting the cases.
Yep, they get the money from the trolls.
Yeah, exactly. And one of his, I think it was his fifth highest contributor by sector was TV and music.
And he used to be, and check it out.
If the song that was at the Bush inauguration, he wrote that.
Yeah, not only did he write it, I mean, go look at this guy's Wikipedia. He used to be he used to own a record label. Mm-hmm. He used to manage artists. Like, it's bad. This bill is bad.
He's made something like $10,000 off from some like Mormon singing group thing that he used to be involved in.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is really funny is the fact that his son, who he claims never lobbied him or anything like that, his son is involved in a whole bunch of this stuff and would benefit in disgusting manners. I'm not going to go through the entirety of it because, again, I touched on all that back in the article there. You can find it pretty easily. But his son is a lobbyist who claims that he's never lobbied his own father, despite the fact that some of the decisions his father's made has actually benefited him and his law firm. Cough. Fucking cough.
Oh, yeah. I'm bet. All right. Well, we're about at it. So I'm going to remind everybody listening, I didn't say this at the top of the show, but you can go to our website, think-liberty.com. You can grab our shirts. We usually have a special offer, so you can get the $15 shirt, whatever shirt's going on at the time, or you can, we do have shirts on Amazon, so if you go and check out the $15 shirt, it's the brand name up there, Think Liberty. You can click on that and see all the other shirts that we have available on Amazon that you can get with Amazon Prime, so it's free next day shipping. We still have our old store, the Spreadshirt store, so you can go grab some of those shirts before we pull that down too. Follow us on whatever social media, just look for us, we'll be there. And make sure there's that little bell. I'm gonna do it before Killian gets to do it. I like that you've been mentioning this. There's a little bell on our website. Go ahead and subscribe to that, and it's going to give you an update whenever the articles come out, and it's going to tell you about articles just like the one that was written here about this horrible bill.
Can I throw one last thing in,
please?
Speaking of the t-shirts, maybe you want to tell the story about someone trying to copy the Live Your Death shirt. Yeah. I think that's a really great point to end.
Oh, it is. That's funny. Yeah. So Amazon merch, if anyone here, I don't know if anyone listening is familiar with Amazon merch, but it's kind of like the wild, wild west out there. You put a shirt up, and if you get a handful of sales, someone's going to notice, and they will try to basically make the same shirt that you did. So my shirts take a bit more than just arranging some text. I do quite a bit with them, right? They're unique designs. So after we sold a fair amount of these Liberty or Death shirts, all of a sudden we see them popping up, and I found a bunch, and
they all sucked.
Yeah, they were bad. Well, they just like one took the font. They found out what font it was, so they took the font, and then they just kind of like just typed it, right? Just like Liberty or Death. And then that just, of course, it didn't look the same, right? Because I'm arranging these things in certain ways and doing certain things to them. So no one's been able to replicate it yet. There's a couple that have tried. I guess it's flattering, right?
And it goes back to my point. When you're making a product, the way that you make sure that you hold the IP for it, the way that you hold the ownership of the intellectual property,
make it hard to copy.
Do it better. It better.
Just make it hard to copy. That's right. All right, fellas. Well, on behalf of my wonderful guest this evening, to everybody listening, thank you very much. And whether or not you like it, we'll probably be back again.